Have you ever had that feeling when you're on your own, but you're convinced that you're being watched? Or when everything is quiet, but you're sure you just heard footsteps coming from upstairs? In this video, we will dive into the lives of babysitters who encounter the unexplainable. We're going to explore the real-life stories of babysitters who have their nights turned upside down by paranormal activity. Imagine settling in for a quiet evening with the little ones, only to find yourself face to face with the supernatural. From disembodied footsteps to closet doors opening and closing on their own, these brave sitters share their hair-raising experiences that will leave you questioning what lurks in the shadows. So, grab your popcorn, dim the lights, and prepare for a deep dive into a journey of the unknown. I'm your host, Severed Soul. Right now, I'm babysitting every Monday for my cousin while she's at work. She has two children, who I refer to as my niece, 6 years old, and nephew, 4 years old. I know they say children are far more sensitive to the supernatural than adults are, but on this day, my nephew said something to me that really creeped me out. We were making bead jewellery, laughing and having a good time, when all of a sudden my nephew looked at me and said, "Did you know that a woman and a little boy are following you? They're right behind you now." As I'm sure you could imagine, these words sent a shiver down my spine. I tried my best to ignore it and said, "Really? Okay," and went back to what we were doing. I texted my boyfriend and told him what my nephew had said, and he suggested that I ask my nephew if he knew the names of the woman and the little boy. But he insisted that it was probably just an overactive imagination. By the time my boyfriend had responded, about an hour had passed, and my nephew had fallen asleep for a nap. He woke up from his nap about 10 minutes later, screaming and crying, which wasn't unusual for him, as he sometimes still wets the bed, and this is how he reacts. When I asked him if he'd peed on himself, he said, "A little bit, but I'm just really scared. Chicken Rooster woke me up." I said to him, "Who is Chicken Rooster?" What he said next was absolutely terrifying. He said, "Chicken Rooster is the man that sleeps beneath my cot." I've babysat many times, but this is the first time he's ever mentioned anything like this. Although I must admit, every time I've been upstairs in that house, I've felt a really heavy, ominous presence. When he came downstairs after his nap, I asked him if he knew the names of the woman and little boy who were following me. He said no, he didn't know the names of any of the ghosts in that house except for the man that sleeps under his bed. Mid-conversation, his eyes immediately darted to the upstairs hallway that connects to the stairs. He looked as though he was in a trance, and when I asked him what he was looking at, he didn't even acknowledge my question. I tracked his gaze as his head and eyes slowly followed down the stairs, as if he was watching somebody walk down them. He finally answered, and with a quiver in his voice, he said, "They're all coming downstairs now. They're staring straight at us." I've never been so terrified in all my life. I wish to God that my little nephew was just saying this for a reaction, but the fear was written all over his face. I'm going to speak to my cousin, tell her what my nephew's been saying, and ask her if she's ever experienced anything spooky in that house. I just really hope my nephew is okay. I'll apologise in advance. This one is kind of long. Back in high school, I used to babysit for a young family with two little kids, a 4-year-old girl and a 2-year-old boy. Although I'd known the family for a long time, they'd just moved back to my town after living in another city for a few years. Both of the parents had work commitments and asked me to babysit for them. The house they moved into was about 30 years old, built in the late 70s in a quiet neighbourhood. The first couple of nights I spent at their house, I kept getting this really creepy feeling that I was being watched. The energy in the kitchen dining area at the back of the house and the living room area down in the basement was particularly dark. Initially, I tried my best to brush it off as nighttime heebie-jeebies in a new environment. Maybe my imagination was just getting the better of me. Overall, I had 3 memorable, really creepy experiences during my time in that house. The first incident happened one night after I'd put the kids to bed and I was waiting for their parents to arrive back home. I was sitting in the basement living room watching a film, a light-hearted Disney film to be precise. I had the volume on low so I could listen out for the children, and I was just starting to doze off slightly when I heard a sound coming from upstairs. I heard slow, heavy footsteps moving above me, from the kitchen to the master bedroom area over the other side of the house. Thinking maybe the parents had arrived home early, I went upstairs to greet them, but there was nobody there. I quickly checked on the kids because their bedroom was right next to the master bedroom. The boy was sound asleep in his crib and the girl was fast asleep in her own bed. After that experience, I would quite often hear footsteps moving around upstairs, from the kitchen and between the bedrooms. Most often when the children were downstairs playing with me. It always made my hairs stand on end, but eventually I just became accustomed to it. My second memorable experience happened one night while I was sitting on the couch and the children were playing with their toys on the floor. I listened again as the footsteps crossed the hallway from the kitchen to the master bedroom. Only this time the sound of the footsteps was followed by the startling sound of one of the bedroom doors slamming shut. That night, I let the kids stay up later than usual until their parents came home. It didn't sit right with me leaving them upstairs on their own after hearing what I'd just heard. I did check the whole upstairs for drafts or any other realistic, logical explanation, but I couldn't find anything that could possibly have caused that door to slam shut. A few months later, during a conversation with the children's mum, I learned that there might just be a reason for my spooky experiences. She mentioned that her husband really wanted to complete the unfinished bedrooms down in the basement so the children could sleep down there. The couple were expecting a new baby later that year, so they needed the extra space upstairs. She mentioned that decorating the bedrooms downstairs might lighten the dark, creepy energy that she felt down there. I mentioned my own feeling of being watched down in the basement, but I quickly laughed it off and played it down. I didn't want her thinking I was uncomfortable babysitting for the children. Instead, she looked at me with a surprised expression on her face and said, "Wow, you don't know what's happened in this house, do you?" She then briefly told me about the house's history, which she'd learned from neighbours not long after moving in. Apparently, a man that used to live in the house ended his life after a battle with depression caused by financial problems. Despite this new knowledge, I was somehow convinced to carry on babysitting for the children in that house. The footsteps were almost a constant thing at this point, but luckily, it never escalated from there. That was until my third and final memorable experience in that house. It happened one night while I was making dinner for the kids while they played downstairs. As I stood in the kitchen, I heard a very distinct tapping noise on one of the walls. I ignored it for a few minutes until it really started to get on my nerves. I looked directly at the wall where the tapping was coming from, and immediately it stopped. I continued cooking for a while, until the tapping started again as I was finally dishing up the dinner. When the tapping persisted for a minute or two, I'd finally had enough and turned round and said, "Knock it off," to an empty room. Immediately, the tapping stopped again. At this point, I quickly grabbed the 2 plates of dinner and took them downstairs to the children. I told them on this one occasion they could eat down there instead of eating in the dining room. When I returned upstairs to the kitchen, a chill ran down my spine when I found a neatly stacked pile of cups on the kitchen work surface. Something was definitely trying to grab my attention that night, although it didn't feel threatening at all. A few months later, I graduated high school and moved away, which put an end to my babysitting and my experiences in that house. But I still wonder about it sometimes. I was around 14 years old when I'd gotten a babysitting job with a family just across town. This family was new to the area and had just bought a house right next door to my best friend's place. My first day over was to get used to the family and to the house. They had 2 children, a girl named Cameron who was 7 years old, and a boy named Devin who was 4 years old, so I had my work cut out for me. Parents watched and evaluated me, and of course answered any questions I had, and I answered theirs. I spent my first evening playing, keeping the children occupied, and just generally getting to know them. Cameron wanted to take me to her bedroom so she could show me some of her favourite toys. I followed her up the 2 flights of stairs, but as I reached the landing at the top of the stairs, I felt unusually light-headed, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. I had this really intense feeling of being watched, as if somebody was up there with us. I tried my best to ignore the sensation and carry on with my duties. I helped Cameron find her favourite doll, and we went back downstairs. At the end of the day, it was decided that I was a good match, and we agreed that I'd go back on the Saturday morning. But as I headed home, I couldn't shake that uneasy feeling I felt upstairs. I convinced myself I was just feeling unsettled because it was a new environment and unfamiliar surroundings. That Saturday morning, I arrived to a busy house, as the parents were rushing around trying to get out of the door, showing me all the last-minute things I needed to know. The kids were still in their pyjamas eating breakfasts, excitedly telling me all the things that they wanted to do that day. After the parents left the house, I ushered the kids to get washed and changed. As I was cleaning up the breakfast dishes, I heard a loud clattering sound coming from in the dining room. I ran into the room and found that one of the false ceiling tiles was now on the floor. Puzzled, I tried my best to put it back, but it wasn't an easy task. After some struggling, I managed to fit it back in, but it was a really snug fit. I was thinking to myself, how the hell has that fallen out? The morning passed by pretty quickly. It was approaching lunchtime, and the kids were watching TV. I was in the kitchen making something for lunch when once again I heard a loud bang coming from in the dining room. I looked into the dining room and sure enough, that same tile had fallen out again. This time, I moved the tile to one side for the parents to see when they came home, thinking, well, maybe they can fix it. After lunch, the kids wanted to play hide and seek, so we started off with Cameron seeking and me and Devin hiding. As Cameron started to count, we scurried around trying to find the best hiding place. I decided that the downstairs bathroom was the best place for us to hide. It would be easy enough for Cameron to find us down there, and I hid Devin in a place not too far from me so I could keep a watchful eye on him. As I entered the bathroom, I closed the door quietly behind me. I walked a few steps into the bathroom and was now facing the mirror. As I glanced into the mirror at my reflection, I noticed something moving behind me. It was the bathroom closet door. It was slowly opening. It opened halfway and then closed again, all on its own. I had that very same feeling come over me, like I did on the first day in that house upstairs. Wide-eyed with fear, I turned to the bathroom door, grabbed Devin and ran out. All I could think of in my head was, what on earth was that? I was really starting to worry at this point that this house was haunted, and I now had every ghost horror movie I'd ever watched playing through my head. Now, I was really feeling uncomfortable, but decided the best thing to do was just to keep occupied. The kids wanted to play a board game, so I got some games out and we played Hungry Hippos on the living room floor. We were playing for about 20 minutes when once again, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something moving. I slowly turned my head to see what it was, and one of Devin's toy cars was slowly moving across the floor on the other side of the room. The kids stopped and watched in confusion. I was in total shock and disbelief. Cameron let out a scream and ran for the door, so I grabbed Devin and followed closely behind. We went to my friend's house next door and told her mum everything. I'm not sure she believed us, but she let us stay there until the children's parents arrived home. When they showed up, I told them exactly what we'd seen, and I'm not too sure they believed me either. I showed them the panel that had fallen out, and apparently it had been an issue since they moved in. And as for the rest of my experiences, they just chalked it up to an overactive imagination. I know what I saw and what I felt, and I know it wasn't my imagination. I later found out a bit of history on the house. Apparently, a man had had a heart attack and passed away in the room just above the dining room. I think his spirit still lingers in that house. Maybe he was just looking for some attention. Have you ever experienced anything like this? When I was in high school, at around 15 years old, I babysat 2 boys every day after school. I'd also babysit for them some weekend nights when the parents wanted to go to concerts, etc. For privacy reasons, let's call the boys Drake, 11, and Josh, 13. This incident happened on a Saturday night when the boys' parents were enjoying an evening out. Parents would always leave money for takeaways on these nights, so when the time came to collect the food, Drake always wanted to come with me, while Josh stayed and played his video games. This was pretty normal behaviour for both of them. Me and Drake left the house and locked the door behind us. We went and got the pizza, taking probably no more than 15 minutes. Then when we arrived back at the house, we stayed in for the rest of the night. I called up to Josh to let him know that dinner was here. We all enjoyed our pizza and watched the movie and settled down. But this is when it starts to get weird. It happened around October time, so it starts to get dark outside pretty early. The boys were getting sleepy, and it was getting dark outside, so I told them it was time to start getting ready for bed. They were practically both falling asleep watching the movie anyway. They both put up very little resistance and headed upstairs. Normally, it can be quite a challenge getting them to go up to bed, especially Drake. They have a second-story family room, so you can see the upstairs bedrooms and hallway from the family room and the kitchen downstairs. There is also a nanny cam set up in the boys' bedroom so I can monitor them at all times. I was in the kitchen when I noticed Drake getting out of bed on the nanny cam. I looked up into the hallway and saw him approach the top of the stairs. Instantly, I could tell that he wasn't looking himself. His face was very pale and he looked quite drowsy. Then, with a quiver in his voice, he spoke up and asked me if I could come upstairs for a second. I immediately felt really uneasy. He sounded genuinely terrified. I'd never seen him act that way. His voice was trembling, and he was definitely very scared of something. This was really unlike him. Of course, I followed him upstairs to go and see what was wrong. He pointed to a certain closet upstairs and asked me if I'd opened it. He said that him and Josh never opened that closet. The closet door was wide open, and clearly this was really freaking him out. And although I tried my best not to show it, I was pretty creeped out too. I came up with a quick, logical explanation and tried my best to calm him down. I said something along the lines of, it probably just didn't latch closed properly and popped open. He insisted that this has never happened before, and that actually that's impossible because of the way it latches shut. I must admit, I was having a hard time believing it myself. I'd spent nearly every day in that house over the past year, and I'd never known that closet door to be open. I tried my best to keep the boys calm, and insisted that it was nothing to be concerned about. But, inside, alarm bells were ringing. Before I continue, I must stress that I absolutely do not believe that Drake was lying or messing with me. And I certainly know it wasn't Josh. He's not the type to pull pranks or anything like that. He was very quiet and sweet, a really friendly little boy, always keeping himself to himself, not mischievous or confrontational at all. I closed the closet door, making absolutely sure this time that it was latched fully closed, and ushered the boys back to bed. If you're thinking that maybe I left the front door unlocked when I went to get pizza, I can assure you that this is definitely not the case. I always make absolutely certain that the door is locked behind me. Plus, when we were leaving to get pizza, Drake told me I could leave the door unlocked because we wouldn't take too long, but I insisted anyway and locked the door. Anyway, a few hours later, the boys were both in bed fast asleep. I was watching TV downstairs with the screen for the nanny cam right next to me so I could keep an eye on them. The incident with the closet door was at the back of my mind by this point, and I was settling down nicely watching TV. I was just dozing off when a shuffling sound caught my attention on the nanny cam. When I looked at the screen, I could clearly see what looked like a shadowy mass moving just outside the boys' bedroom door. Both of the boys, however, were sound asleep, and that is when I heard it. The sound of the closet door unlatching and slowly creaking open. When I say my heart was going 10 to the dozen, I mean it literally felt like my heart was about to burst out of my chest. I slowly crept from the sofa and made my way to the stairs. One by one, I climbed each step, my body totally shaking with fear. As I reached the top of the stairs and peeked over onto the landing, my worst fear was confirmed. The closet door, just outside the boys' bedroom, was wide open. But not only that, the light inside the closet had been turned on too. At this point, I really didn't know what to do. I was absolutely terrified. Eventually, I found the courage to turn the light off and close the closet door. I checked in on the boys to make sure they were both still fast asleep, and made my way downstairs. Before I could settle, I knew it was my responsibility to be absolutely certain there were no intruders inside the house. So, room by room, I crept through the house, making sure every room was empty, until I was absolutely satisfied that nobody had broken in. Other than myself and the boys, that house was completely empty. Maybe I should have found some reassurance in this, but for me, this just confirmed that I had just had a paranormal experience. I turned on all the lights in the house and glued myself as flat as a pancake to the sofa until the boys' parents came home. Maybe an hour or so later the parents returned home, and I tried to briefly explain to them what had happened. The mum seemed pretty sheepish and tried to blame it on the cat. I love the whole family, but I honestly felt like this was some kind of cop-out. It was impossible to unlatch that door without opposable thumbs. The mum didn't even seem too surprised at what I was telling them. She kind of gave the impression she knew exactly what I was talking about. Of course, I dropped it, agreed with their hypothesis, and drove my ass all the way home. That was the last night I ever babysat for those boys, and it gives me goosebumps every time I think back to what happened that night. I'll never forget the look of fear on Drake's face, and how I too felt terrified when I heard that closet door unlatch and open on its own. I know this story might sound dumb to some people, but that closet door was definitely closed at the beginning of the night, and I've never seen it left open, ever. As a teenage girl, I was very unsettled by the whole experience. That brings the video to an end. I really hope those stories give you nightmares. If you enjoyed the stories, please like and subscribe to the channel for a feast of grim and grisly content. And leave any thoughts down in the comments section below. As always, thank you for watching. I'm your host, Severed Soul.